makers, crafters, and builders. My name is Nathan Wheeler, and this is the Irish Makers Podcast. This episode, we're taking a step out of the city and the urban areas of Ireland, and we're going out to the countryside, where we'll be talking to rural Irish makers about how they pursued their passion over the long and hard COVID period. For many makers, the city and urban areas are a mainstay for the making community. The maker spacers are there, the suppliers are there, and it seems like all the events are there. So the cities seem to have everything, except the one thing that they really need for making, which is space. From baking to upcycling, and even a man who makes his own CNC machine. We'll be talking about how COVID affected makers and how they use their space to really advance their making. Today, we're going to be joined by Ian, Kerry, Namrata, and Heather. So let's jump right into our first guest and let's talk about how making in a rural space in Ireland can be a whole different world. Let's jump right into our first guest, Ian Kerry. Ian started making as a small child, cultivating an obsession with Lego, Connects, and Meccano. Ian progressed quickly to more advanced making. This guy learned to weld when he was 12 years of age. I can't even fathom that. He spent the guts of 10 years working as a senior software developer in some of Ireland's biggest businesses. However, during this time, he lost his spark for creativity, focusing more on his health rather than focusing on making. So with a renewed drive and an awful lot more space, having moved out of the city down to rural Wicklow, during COVID, he found he had an awful lot of time and not an awful lot of time to go out to the gym or to exercise. So he spent his time relearning the art of making. He builds CNC machines. He does videos on YouTube. This guy is an all-round maker. Ian, it's great to have you on the show.
Nathan, great
Ian,
to
how you doing?
To be here, man. Not too bad. How are you?
I'm grand. It's great to talk to you. How does one learn to weld at 12 years of age? Because that's what the listeners want to hear.
I suppose it's misspent youth. I have to credit a lot of my early making, and even actually my current making, to probably my dad. He's one of the biggest influences I've ever had in terms of doing things with my hands and making. Like, he was the DIY man growing up. Like, everything that could be made, he was making it. And between him and his brother, my uncle, we used to build cars and stuff in my uncle's garage when I was a kid. And I spent all of my time as a kid in sheds and garages, just getting dirty and messing with stuff. And that's when you're there and you're getting in the way, it's you get handed a tool and get told to do something useful with it. So I learned to weld. It's there's some metal, we need that to be square. You go weld that. And that's kind of just how it started for me.
Because I've met a lot of welders, and the first thing any welder will tell you when they look at you, it's like, yeah, it hurts. And then they're like, what? Sorry. It's like, it's molten metal and it can fall on you. And I'm always like, what? But did you ever burn yourself or hurt yourself, or was your dad was like, get in there?
I don't think I ever had any bad injuries or burns. I always had, as much as it sounds like, child neglect just being thrown in, I was always, docked up with all of the welding masks and gloves and jackets and everything. So I never really got anything. I did own a pair of really small overalls that my dad got me, which ended up this is the same thing. You're welding and they just get covered in sparks and spatters. So you get all these little burn marks. So you'd look at your arms and you'd be like, where the hell do these little burn marks come from? It's just the slag from the welding. But those overalls did save me very much once. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but at some point I used to work in over the summer, I worked in a family friend's car body repair shop. And I got set on fire, which the overalls basically saved me. So How
did you get set on fire? How does how do you not lead with every conversation? I'm Ian and I was set on fire.
Well, so we were in the workshop, and there was a Range Rover, the whole side had been taken off of it. And because it's 80, 90 grand motor. So it's more cost effective for the insurance company to actually repair large damage on it than just to write it off. So we were replacing huge side panels on it. And there was a fella on the roof of the Range Rover, and he was welding, tacking in the new panel. But these panels, they come shipped in what's called packing wax. So it's just a matte black panel that's covered in this waxy substance to just stop corroding and stuff. So the way you have to get rid of that before you weld it and stuff is you have to use degreaser on it, which is just like a solvent-based stuff. So I was at one end degreasing the panel, and your man was going to come along the roof to weld the bits that I was degreasing. But of course, degreaser is extremely flammable.
Yeah.
So a single spark from his welder came down and hit the rag. So that burst into flames. And then I was just like, ah. So I dropped it, and it like landed on the shoulder of my overalls, the very same overalls, which then like were, and I was just there, and I just started screaming, I was like, fire, fire. And the fella who was up on the roof, he just lifted his welding mask, cigarette hanging out of his mouth, of course, and underneath the welding mask, and just goes, Mick, bucket. One of the lads runs over and throws a bucket of water over me. And that was it. And then I went on with the day. And then ever after, every day I walked into that place, the lads just used to scream, fire! Whenever I was walking around the place. That might actually be child neglect.
What age were you?
I think I was 15 or 16 at that stage, I think.
That's a great story, though, for your making. So listen, I want to jump straight into it. So you left the city. You worked there for a period of about 10 years. During COVID, then you moved out back to your hometown in rural Wicklow. I'm a Wicklow man myself, although I'll never admit it. So what brought making back into your life? Like, what do you make? We talked about a CNC machine, but first you need to explain what a CNC machine is and explain how you got it back into making.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's kind of, like, I think you alluded to it in the intro that I used to be, when I was living in Dublin, I got my biggest hobby that I had. I was really into like fitness, and I got really into CrossFit and stuff like that. So I used to train like 2 hours a day doing like CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting, and I used to go to competitions and all this sort of stuff. And then over COVID, obviously that's just like overnight just gone. So all of a sudden I have nothing to do anymore. As everyone did, and you were all locked up at home. One of the things that I used to do a lot was I used to follow a bunch of like CrossFit people on YouTube and like watch videos of competitions and all this sort of stuff. But I noticed over COVID, all the competitions were gone. So all these content creators weren't producing any content. So suddenly my feed is just like dry. There's nothing there. And then bizarrely, randomly, maker videos started being suggested to me. And the first one I remember that caught my eye was something on Adam Savage's Tested. And I was like, oh, I remember that guy from being obsessed with Mythbusters when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I started watching a couple of his videos, and that's just, the rabbit hole just went down and down and down. And all of a sudden I'm watching videos on this old Tony, watching machining videos. I was like, I have no idea what this stuff is, but I'm fascinated by it. So that really like reignited the spark in me, that is like all the skills that I had and the stuff that I love doing with my hands that I just hadn't been able to do living in Dublin for 10 years, living in tiny apartments, like boxy little apartments, and with no space to do anything with. So when the opportunity came about halfway through COVID, like halfway through between different lockdowns, the opportunity came up for me and my partner to move back down to rural Wicklow, where we're both from. And suddenly I had all this space. I have like a shed out the back. I have a dedicated office space in the house where I have a workbench set up over here beside me, where I've got, I can make things again. And it just really went from there. Now, the CNC project, I have no idea why I came up with this idea. There was just something about it sort of captivated me. I think for years I've always loved the idea of these machines and what they're capable of doing. And it just, for some reason, I was just like, I'm going to build one of those. And that was it. And then once a seed like that burrows itself into my head, I can't ignore it. It's all I will think about. Like, I would say before I started cutting any pieces of metal to build this machine, I was like literally dreaming about it. Like, I'd go to bed and I'd be thinking about it lying in bed. And like that could happen for weeks on end. And then I'm like, right, I'm doing it. And then once I started, I just can't stop until it's finished.
CNC machines are intrinsically very, very complicated machines. Like, you've got all the little servo motors, you've got the software behind it, you've got the tracks. Like would you explain in a tweet what a CNC machine does? Because I'd imagine there's an awful lot of listeners being like, oh, I don't know what a CNC machine. Maybe the magic man will explain it.
Sure. So, oh man, a tweet. That's hard. basically it's a computer controlled cutting machine that you can program. Like you design something in CAD software, 3D model. You can send it to the machine, and then the machine can move around in space, and it can use like a cutting head to cut out that shape that you've given it, and it can do it with incredible accuracy. Like far better than you could do by hand. And then the big advantage of it as well for like commercial purposes is that it's repeatable. So if you click the button, you click the print button multiple times, it'll keep churning out the exact same thing without the margin for error that you could have if you were doing it by hand or anything like that. And as you can see in the picture there, it can also be used to draw some abstract art as well.
Listen, Ian, thank you so much. We'll catch up with you in a couple of minutes when we get into the round table. We're just going to chat to our next guest, who is Heather. Heather has been making on and off for several years. Her mum was a seamstress, and she was always really happy to be working on any sort of project whenever she got a chance. During COVID, herself and her husband began working on upcycling, a major passion of mine, and I'm really excited to talk to her about it. She's taken cable reels, turned them into tables. She's taken old couches, completely reupholstered them. She's taken chairs, tables, literally anything you can imagine. This woman has completely remade them and given them a fresh bit of life. I'm so excited to talk to her about this. Heather, how are you?
Hi, Nathan. How are you?
I'm fine. I've been looking at your pictures the last couple of days of just you working on this cable reel, and I'm just so jealous. I want to just jump straight into this because I think it's such an amazing project. How did you start with upcycling? Like, where did that even begin?
So it began quite a while ago. So myself and my husband wanted bedside tables for the rental property that we were in, but they were like really expensive in the shops and not great quality either. So one day I was in town and I wandered into a secondhand store, and here was a pair of really old, really dirty looking bedside cabinets for £10. We lived in Northern Ireland at the time. And we'd done some decoupage classes at the Knit and Stitch show in Dublin one year. And I thought, you know what? Bit of decoupage, they'll come up lovely. So we got bedside cabinets for £10 plus the decoupage paper. And we sat in our small terraced house trying to do decoupage on top of a coffee table throughout the winter. But this particular project, the cable reel, we always wanted to do a cable reel project, and we had 2 cable reels set aside that we wanted to do, but we'd never gotten around to it. And the start of the first lockdown, well, we were kind of like, well, we've got an awful lot of time on our hands at the weekends, and maybe like the weather was really good as well. We thought like maybe it'd be nice to get to do one of these cable reels and make it as like an outside like picnic bench. So this particular cable reel had been left outside for a winter on a building site. My dad had used it to prop up some water tanks for a house he was building. So it was it needed a lot of TLC.
I can imagine the water damage on that must be massive.
Yeah, so you'll see the bottom there. We had to completely remake the bottom of it. And I have a couple of pictures in the folder that I shared with you, where it was like there was just sections of it that were just really rotten that we just could not save. So what we had to kind of transplant some bits of timber from the bottom to the top to keep the circular top. But we did manage to keep the center bits, the struts, the central struts of the wood, and the vast majority of the top of it. But like it took us a couple of months because we had to like dismantle it, leave it outside to kind of dry, and we were very lucky. I think it was April time in the first lockdown where it
was fiercely good weather. It was like leaving cert weather all year.
Yeah. And it was the perfect weather to dry it out. but yeah, then when the bad weather came, the two of us sat in the shed basically with with uh, FFP2 masks, which were like gold dust at the time, sanding back this table, a sander each, just taking a section each and going ham at it.
Just hours of just
Yeah.
like that it's very therapeutic though. Like I found that like
Yes.
if you're sanding something, you can just get lost in a podcast like this one or
Yeah.
a video or anything, and you just sit away and you just sand all day, and then every so often you're like, oh, I should probably go to a higher grit. And it's like it's
Yeah.
brilliant when you go to the next grit and you're like, oh, it's starting to come up really, really
Yeah.
good. I absolutely love this project. I think cable reels are just they're such a ubiquitous item. Like the ESB goes through, I think it's a couple of hundred of them, of these enormous ones. These things are nearly as big as buildings for these
Yeah.
massive overhead lines. They go through so many of them a year, and I think very few of them are actually recycled. The wooden ones even less so. So it's great to see them getting a second bit of life. You said a statement when we talked the other day about,
Yeah.
I love this. I think it's a beautiful line. We have fast fashion and we have fast furniture. And I think
Yeah.
that's been sitting with me the last couple of days. I was like, that's so true. When we think of furniture, we think of it as a very, very temporary item. We think of
Yeah.
MDF and chipboard, and that's the quality we seem to go for. And we
Yeah.
never think of having things that will last a lifetime. Like, do you think that that's a? What do you think about that issue?
Yeah, I think like well, specifically like for this project as well, like we could have gone out and bought like plastic chairs and benches for outside, and they might have lasted like a couple of summers. But with this, we we gave it all the treatments that it needed. We went into a local paint store. We talked at length with them about what we wanted to do so that we could pick the right wood treatments and paints and all of that so that this would weather the test of time.
Hmm.
And I think I've lost all sense of time. Are we 2 years now since the first lockdown? but
Just about 2 years.
but it
But
still looks
it'd be 2 years
yeah,
in 3 days because
yeah,
it only started just before Comic Con, 2 or 3
yeah,
days before Comic Con.
yeah. So like that, it still looks exactly the same as the day that we finished painting it after those pictures. So like, already it's an indication that it like we'll have this for years and years and years to come. And I like that. Like, I mean, some people might say, tight with money, but I feel like it's a much better investment to invest the time and the resources to make something that's going to last, that's going to stand the test of time, rather than heading into your local flat pack place without naming names and getting a bedside cabinet that like your child might like break the handles or the leg of it, and oh well, that's it, that's out to the scrap heap. Like,
You're so right, and like you have something there that I think an awful lot of our urban dwelling makers are looking at in that picture. You have a shed.
yeah.
That's like but it's not something that's a part of Irish culture very much anymore. Like you see new builds. New builds do not come with sheds. They do not come with
No.
garages. They do not come with space for storage or making. We live in a very disposable lifestyle where we hold on to things again from a certain flat pack store, and until they become a sponsor, we won't
Yeah.
bad out them. But we hold on to things and they're very much like, oh, I'll get a bit of use out of this and then I will discard it. And someone
Yeah.
told me a very, very good point, and it's made me think an awful lot about upcycling the past couple of years. They said, everything you've ever owned or used is somewhere.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, you think, what? You're thinking like everything you've used, everything you've thrown out, everything you've gone through, that's somewhere. That just didn't disappear. That's
Yeah.
somewhere still on this planet. Some of it might
Yeah.
have been recycled. The vast majority hasn't. And if we can take some beautiful objects and give them another lease on life, that to me it's amazing. And most importantly, you have pictures of that. You have a story beyond that.
Yeah.
Anyone who comes over, you can talk to them about that. And that must be such a great conversation starter and must really stand to you. You have so much memories attached to that piece of furniture.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a great way for particularly around the time when we did it, to just get away from the doom scrolling and all of the news, and we would just leave our phones inside unless we needed to check, when would the local store be allowing people to collect stuff, resources that we need for it. It was just a great way to get away, and the two of us just spent hours there and talking to each other, and it was really, really nice.
That's brilliant. Listen, Heather, thank you so much for taking the time. We'll catch you in the
No.
round table. I want to move over to my last guest now, which is Namrata. Now, Namrata moved to Ireland from Austria in the middle of the pandemic 2020. So right in the middle of things, she was like, yeet, I'm going over to Ireland. She found it quite isolating. It was difficult to socialize and meet new people. I think most people felt that way. But if you're just coming here from another country and you're trying to meet people, I can only imagine how difficult that was. As a result, Namrata found her passion, two passions, baking and crocheting. Her biggest success so far has been in baking. She's incredibly passionate about it. When she starts talking about it, you can see her whole face light up. She was inspired by Claire Safiz's words, there are no just cooks out there, and she's convinced that there are only bakers who haven't been converted yet. She loves creating artwork with icing, floral designs, hand-painted designs, experimenting with flavors, and uses her grandmother's recipes for an awful lot of her tea cakes. She also ran a large campaign in 2021 where she sent out handmade butter cookies to deserving people all across Ireland. Namrata, how are you doing? It's great to have you on the Irish Makers podcast.
Yeah, I'm great.
It's great to have you here. So tell me, what has it been like joining the making community here in Ireland?
It's slightly intimidating to be honest, because you meet some people who are very good, and they really pursue their passions, and I'm that kind of person who will try something and then who's also very scared of failure. So there were moments where I tried new things and it just wasn't working. And I was like, oh my god, everyone's gonna judge me. But actually, it only took talking about the failures to understand the people feel the same way, and they were very welcoming. So initially, there was a bit of intimidation on myself, where I felt a bit intimidated. But as I grew more familiar, I felt that no, it's everyone is very welcoming and very, very warm. So yeah,
that's so good. I know exactly what you mean by the fear of failure. And it's so much something that can often hold us back, and we think, oh, I can't do that, or there's no way I'd ever be able to do that other person does. And we never think that through an awful lot of hard work, eventually, and we mightn't notice it until it happens, but eventually there's someone else standing behind us going, oh, I wish I could be as good as that person. And it's such a slow rise up to get to that point, because these things take practice, they take time, and it can be really kind of unnerving when you get there and you're like, oh, I'm actually really good at this.
yeah.
Well, listen, so I'm a non-fabric orientated maker. I do an awful lot of upcycling. I do an awful lot of model making. I can sew, but I have no idea what crochet is. Could you explain it to me like I'm 5?
So crocheting is basically you there's a single needle, and then you weave the yarn with it. And the good thing about crocheting is it's very friendly on your fingers and joints compared to knitting, which takes a bit of toll. But you can make toys with it, you can make clothes with it, you can make accessories. So like I made this headband.
Oh, let's see. Oh, that's awesome.
It's just a headband that you put, and I made this hat. So this is blue. I don't think you can see it. Yeah. So these were the 2 crochet pieces that I did during the lockdown, and I made a big tartan blanket actually, and that was initially when the lockdown had started, and I got like $200 worth of yarn from Canada shipped over to Ireland, and I designed the whole thing, and I made that whole tartan blanket, and it's in the drawing room right now. But yeah, that was a big project, and
That's amazing. That must have taken so many hours. Like how many hours does it take to like make something like that hat?
so I was doing like an hour and a half of crocheting every day for that blanket, and it took me about a month. So yeah, you could easily say 50, 60 hours in total.
That's not as much as I would have thought. But like, it's still a lot of time, and like, you're probably having nightmares of the amount of hours you were working on it. But like, it doesn't seem like a huge amount of time when you really think about it for something so big.
Yeah, it's the same thing with sweaters. You would think that knitting a pullover might take a long time, but it's usually like 7 to 8 hours. But since it's very technical, it's that thing which takes a lot of time, where you have to figure out the design and you have to really calculate everything and then measure it. So especially with wearables, it can be very tricky because the sizes differ and the manuals that you get are very, very vague about who will fit in this.
And how did you get into it?
I learned knitting from my grandma and my mom. So growing up in India, it was cheaper to buy wool and knit it, and than to purchase it from a market. So we came from a family where we had a lot of handmade sweaters, and they lasted years and years, to the point that my grandma knitted me a red sweater when I was 10 or 11, and my sister was wearing it till about a couple of years back as well. So it got handed down to her, and it was perfectly fine. I think she still wears it, and it's perfectly fine in the condition. So we're from that family where you knitted things by hand, and they just lasted generations like that.
That's a really beautiful story to me. And it like that's those are heirlooms, and I think there are other people who would look at that and go, "Oh, is that a sign of kind of what Heather said? Is like, oh, well, like they're making their own clothes. Is that a sign of poverty?" And I would have to say completely the opposite. I'd say that's an incredible ability to share a skill, a passion that's infused through the generations. That you look at that jumper and it's not just, oh, it's whatever, it's fast fashion, chuck it. That is something that you have a great family community connection with, that stays with you for life. I can see you're just thinking, like, when you're talking about it, you're quite passionate about it, and like it's beautiful to have that kind of connection. But I do want to move on because we're pinched for time, and I want to talk about your bigger passion. I want to talk about baking, because you are the biggest baker I hear going, and you have made cookies for people all over the country. You have done absolutely everything. I'm looking at these pictures right now, and I'm both hungry and very jealous of your baking skills. The best I can do is I made Rice Krispie buns last night. I was trying to eat it on the air, but the crinkle is terrible. So tell me about baking. Tell me how you got into it.
I used to like watching a lot of YouTube cooking videos, but I would make food as such, but I never really enjoyed cooking, or actually I never tried to enjoy cooking as much. And one day, so when the lockdown started, everyone was making banana bread, and I'm like, okay, I have never eaten a banana bread, and I can't go to the bakery to buy it because it was closed. So I thought, oh, it doesn't seem that hard, and I'll just give it a shot. And I did, and it was pretty great. And I thought, okay, if I can do this, then maybe I could try something else. So for me, banana bread ended up being like a gateway to baking. And from there on, it was cakes and tea cakes, and then cupcakes, muffins, and then the icing, and experimenting with all the colors and the flavors. And it's like it opened a gateway of possibilities where you can just go crazy with your creativity. It's mad. So
That's incredible. One thing people often say, and I've heard other people talk about it, is people say, like, what is a maker? And it's such a big topic. Do you consider yourself part of the making community when you say you're a baker, or do you think people say, oh no, that's completely different to making? What's your take on that?
I think it is a craft. These cookies that I made, the butter cookies, I had one butter cookie recipe, which was just a plain butter cookie. But then to get complementing flavors together, like white chocolate with matcha, or cranberries with vanilla, or chocolate chip, but a different kind of chocolate chip. So it was salted chocolate chip, basically. and it gives it that caramelized flavor. And so to understand flavors and bring things together, I think that takes a bit of thought process, and to really know how things work together and the chemistry of it. So yeah, I mean, it is a craft. You also have to make the food look good sometimes. So especially with cakes and pastry, you have to try to at least make it presentable if you're giving it to somebody on their birthday. So that it does take a lot of crafting in that space.
I completely agree. And like, it seems like you've come such a long way. And now that COVID is kind of easing up, fingers crossed, do you think you're going to stick with it and you're going to kind of develop these passions further? Or do you think it's kind of,
Yes.
you're going to return back to,
No, I just made a tea cake this morning, and it's cardamom and almonds, and I based it on this thing we have back home. It's called barfi, which is basically like a fudge, but it's very milk heavy, the fudge, and I don't really like making milk heavy sweets for day-to-day, desserts. So I don't think it will change, because I have this itch that I have to scratch all the time to bake. And if I don't do it for a while, then I go mad. I get very upset that, oh, I haven't baked in a while and this is not feeling right. And so I got myself a very nice butcher's block and invested in what do you call a stand mixer.
yeah,
And I feel really good about having a nice setup to actually pursue this. And with things opening up, actually, it's better because I can now share what I make with other people more easily. So I don't have to post out things. Often I would do that. I would just, wrap it up in boxes or, in saran wrap and foil, and then send it out to people, who my friends and colleagues. But now I can actually share with them in person. So that's even better for me.
thank you so much, Namrata. Listen, we're going to go to the round table, but thank you so much for making me incredibly hungry this morning, because now I'm looking at that. I'm like, oh my God, I need to eat something. So now we've got everyone back in here. Hello, makers. It's great to talk to you all. So I have a couple of questions for you, and I hope you can answer it for me. There's a great saying: the cities have the supplies, the rural areas have the space. You guys all seem to have plenty of space, and I'm very, very jealous. How do you think other makers kind of deal with that? Because I know from people I know, we're all so struggling to get space. Like, I currently record this, make, work, and do everything from a small little room in an apartment in Dublin, which is crazy. But we have to do with the space we have. So, like, what have you done with your space, and like, what's it like having a lot of space?
Who's gonna go first?
I can answer that. So I started in a very small apartment, and I used to the whole cookie boxing which you saw was done in a one bedroom apartment, and the kitchen was very tiny that two people can't stand in it at the same time. And I actually had to expand a lot of things into my living room, because that's it's just me living there in that apartment, so I can use whatever space for whatever. Who's gonna come and monitor me? But now we had to then move, because for me and my partner, having a good kitchen space was very important. So we now have a much larger kitchen space, open plan kitchen and everything. And so I feel I'm a little fortunate in that position where I could make that decision. But no, I did see that time where everything was super cramped, and I was going a bit mental with everything happening in the same room.
Do you find what I find though, where it's like you have the space, so then you start to expand and buy all of the things and fill all of the space, and suddenly there's no space to do the things because you've filled it with so much stuff?
Yeah, we're trying not to go down that road. It's a very conscious decision to not do it, and to really hold ourselves back and not just buy every appliance on the earth. But it's
That's
really
exactly
hard.
it. I have that exact same problem. I'll fill space. I just expand into space so easily. Like when we first moved down here, I was looking around like, oh, geez, I've all this space to do so much with, and then now I'm looking around going, it's a bit tight now. Every time I get a new tool or set up a new thing, I'm like, oh, geez, where am I going to put the next thing? Because there's like a list as long as your arm of all the things that you want to fill into a space. But I think like I feel very fortunate to have any kind of space. Like, I felt bad. I was talking when I talk about my lack of space, and then I see the amazing things that Nathan creates and the size of his space, and I'm like, I feel bad now, But like, I think it's one of those things that is your city versus country. Like, there is more space available, but yeah, I still wish I had more.
It's the story of our life. Like, you get a
Yeah.
little bit of space, and you're like, I've got to fill that with stuff. The things become bigger and bigger and bigger. And like, it must be because I know there's so many projects that I cannot work on. I do a little bit of upcycling work, and most of that's kind of got a bunch. I got really into spirit levels lately, and I've got about 50 spirit levels in this apartment at the moment. I'm turning them into things, and my wife keeps looking at me like, "What are you going to do with all these spirit levels?" And I'm like, "Just trust me, I've got a good spirit." She's like, "Oh." But it's all coming together. But like when you have, I'm still looking at that picture with Heather. Like, you have that massive shed, and I'm just like, wow, like there's so much there. You could work on these big projects, and it gives you such a scope to have that. But I guess that the counterpoint to that is that, and I think Ian can really speak to this, and probably Namrata as well, is if the rural areas have the space, the cities, we have all the supplies. We have suppliers, we have the big shops, we have anything you want, and things can get to me within 2 days. If I need something, it's just like boom. So like, how do you struggle with that? Do you find it difficult to get supplies, or is it just an awful lot of ordering and it takes a good while to get to you, or how have you found it?
I think for me, sorry, no, Amanda. You go.
Sorry. No, I was just about to say that I do have to plan a lot in advance. So I do have to order a good bit of, supplies well in advance. So that's just stocking things up is a challenge.
Yeah, I find the same. Like, especially with some of the specialty parts that I would need, like say for the likes of building the CNC machine, like the linear rails, various bearings, different fittings, pulleys, and all that sort of stuff. There's just you can get them here. So you can get to somewhere like Radionics maybe, which can be very expensive, and then also the other option then really is just Amazon. We have to ring up Jeff and get him to make an order, get him to do a delivery for us, but it's that's fine, in a way, like, because I can order, 10 of a thing and it comes from China. It takes, 2 weeks, and I've got 300 socket head cap screws this size, and that's great. But like, there's a shop down the road, there's a shop in the next town where I could buy those socket head cap screws, but they'll charge me, €10 for a handful of them. And I'm like, what's like, how are you supposed to make otherwise, like, without this, relying on supply chain? Amazon is a big one for me. Like 90% of the parts and stuff that I buy, Amazon's the only place that's affordable and reliable to get these kind of things. And even reliability is an issue, because if I go back to try and order something again, chances are it might just vanish and never come back ever. So even if I follow the same link I hit last time from my previous orders, it's just not there anymore. So I think like that's one thing, and I think it's not even a rural Ireland thing. I think it's probably an all Ireland thing. We don't have that really reliable supply chain for making, which is a big issue. I think, like I look jealously when I hear people in the States on YouTube talking about McMaster Car, where they can get like every fitting, every fixture in the world, and they can give a bill of materials up and just get it all shipped to them within days. I was so jealous of that stuff, and I think that's Ireland is really behind a lot of the world in terms of the maker movement, and I think that's one of the things that's like that holds a lot of people back as well. But I mean, you compromise and just order from Jeff and make the best of it. But like, I'd much rather if there was an Irish supplier that I could be giving my money to be getting affordable parts quickly.
Yeah, because even I have to get the things delivered from outside of Ireland, which is not always nice, but it's what you have to do. There's no solution, especially for yarn. It's very, very hard to find things here. So.
Tell me now, there's I seem to be doing all sorts of different lines today, but there is a good one there that anything esoteric is frowned upon in Ireland, especially people who use the word esoteric. So how have you found that being part of your making? I think people look at you a little bit strange and kind of go, "Oh, there's Ian. He makes machines. He's a bit odd." Or Heather is like, "Oh, she has a cable reel. That's such a weird thing to have." Or Namrata, it's like you bake and you love it. It's like, well, that's pretty cool. Like people are really into baking now, so I think you've dodged a bullet there. But for the rest of you, like, how do you find that people react to you when you say you're a maker or you say you're passionate about these things? I think people look at you a bit strange and kind of go, "That's different from the norm."
Have you seen the color of my hair? I mean, people just people look at me strangely all the time. I don't even have to speak. But yeah, sometimes I get people like looking at me when I say, "Oh yeah, I picked up this thing and I'm going to make this with it," and they look at you and they're like, "What? How did you even think of that? Like, where did you get your vision? I don't see it." And then you finish it and they're like, "Oh, okay, yeah, maybe I see it." But yeah, I'd say it's not everyone kind of can have that vision, I suppose. But at the same time, I don't want to say that and turn people off making. I think it can definitely be learned. The vision can be learned.
I think that you get the same thing as well. Like when people ask me or I tell people about stuff I do, they're like, "What is that now?" And they don't know. I try to explain it, and I'm like, "What?" Like, and they're just like, "How did you even start thinking about that thing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know. It just makes sense to me. I don't know. It's just there." But I think like it's one of those things where you just have to do it. And I spam all of my friends and all of my family with like all of the stuff that I'm making and working on, and no one cares. They're just like, "Well done, Ian. That's great, yeah." But then you have to just like what I found like amazing is that I found there is a community in Ireland of people who are interested in these type of things, and if you can find people who are into it, they understand you and they understand what the thing is and they get it. And I think that's really refreshing when you can find that sort of community, that tribe of people who also feel the same way. But like, yeah, the wider world in Ireland, I think it is very, we don't like things that are different. Like in terms of like the esoteric and the things that are just not quite, the norm. It's always a bit like Irish people seem suspicious of it. It's always something I find,
Heather, I see that you have to run. I hear the bells in the background. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I know you've got a hair appointment, so you go run and do that. And thank you so much again for being on the podcast. We'll chat to you soon, Heather.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Perfect. Well, listen, Namrata, Ian, and Heather just had to go a little bit early. I really want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your unique version of making and your experiences. I mean, it means so much to us. Thank you very much. And that's it from the Irish Makers podcast. A big thank you to our sponsors, Coding Grace, to Vicky Toomey Lee, who does all the production on this and makes it all possible. We'll be back with our next episode where we're going to be having a discussion with numerous maker spaces right across the island of Ireland. We want to talk about where you can go and how you can make stuff in these spaces. You can follow the Irish Maker podcast on Twitter, on Instagram, and on TikTok. You can listen to it on Anchor, or you can watch the entire podcast on YouTube. All our guests, they're going to be down in the description. There's going to be little links, and you can click on those links, and you can be like, "Oh, I'm going to follow. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, guys, thank you so much, and you keep making.